Hi. So I wanted to do another tutorial about NVK folder items because I missed a couple things in the last tutorial, and also I've added some new features. The first thing I want to talk about is NVK folder items. This script, it's something that you will always have running once you run it. Of course, you can turn it off too, but when it's running, it creates these markers and then also automatically creates new folder items for you. So most likely, if you're using this in your workflow, you're going to want to have it run every time you open Reaper. And the easiest way I've found to do that is to use SWS global startup actions. So if you're using this, you should already have SWS installed. Otherwise, the scripts won't really work that well. But with it installed, you can just go into extensions and then startup actions and set global startup action. So I already have one, so I can just say replace, but it's going to ask you to paste a command ID here. So I'll just cancel and show you the way to get a command ID. Basically, Reaper, with every action in your list, it has these command IDs that it associates with it. If it's built into Reaper, it'll just be a few numbers, but with custom scripts like this, it's going to be a long hash string. And you can just right click on it and then say copy selected action command ID. And now if you go into the startup actions and say set global startup action, you can just paste that here. And then now that script will load every time you start up Reaper. Since I have a couple scripts that I run on startup, I've actually made a custom action. I just called it NVK startup. And if you make a custom action, then you can add multiple scripts to it. So I just have two right now, but it's the same thing. Just copy selected action command ID and then go into the extensions, set global startup action, and then paste it in here. And now every time you start up Reaper, the NVK folder item script will run and any other actions you want. The other thing I wanted to talk about is just some new features that I've added. So let me just go to NVK folder items and the settings. I've added a few new settings. The first one is folder items disable. I don't really recommend you use this necessarily, but if you want to just have the auto selection where you can click on a folder item and it will automatically select any of the items in that group, you can hit disable and then it won't automatically create new folder items. You'll have to do them manually, but you can still select folder items. And the other thing I've added is markers. So with markers on, it's going to add a marker at the start of every group of folder items for you. So this lets you easily see where the various sets of sounds you have are in your project. And of course, you can turn it off. And if you click in the arrange window, then it will remove them. But let's turn it back on. And the new settings I've added are regions and subproject markers. So subproject markers is just going to do the same thing for folder items, but also for subprojects. So you might want that on or off, depending on if you want to have your subprojects have markers for them. And the other thing I've added is regions. If instead of markers, you'd like to actually have regions over the whole group of sounds, you can turn on regions, click in the arrange window, and then now it's actually created regions for these. And it uses all the same settings for color that the markers use. So I'm going to turn that off. And the next thing I want to talk about is the folder settings. So I've added a new setting here, and that's rename folder items after creation. So the rename folder track after creation setting, I don't think I talked about that, but if you have that on, when you create a new folder using the create new folder from selected items or track script, if you run that, then it's going to automatically open up this dialog to rename your folder track. This next setting, rename folder items after creation, will override that because it wouldn't really be useful to run both of them at the same time. But this one, if you create a new folder, then it's going to open up my rename items script so you can rename the new assets immediately. So it's just a handy little shortcut. And the other thing I've added, I think, is actually pretty useful. It's these excluded words and required words. So these are words that you can add that will be either excluded or required to be in folder track names before creating folder items automatically. So let's say you actually didn't want to use any of the sounds, but you want to store them in your project for later. You could rename this track to unused, and then now it's not going to create folder items for them, but you could still just collapse it and have it somewhere. Another thing you could do is only create folder items for specific tracks. So if I put in a word here, let's say it's SFX, now it's not going to create folder items unless the track has those words. So if I title this track SFX, now it's going to create folder items for that, but as you can see, it's not creating folder items here. So if you want to use these as normal tracks and have items on them, then you can do that. So the other change you might notice is that there's no renders tab. That's because I've updated the render smart script, and now all those settings are in that script instead. So now if you select the items that you want to render, and then you run the render smart script, you'll see it actually has a UI now, and it's going to automatically display the items that you're rendering. And all those settings that were in the renders tab before are now in the settings tab here. And there's a few new ones as well. So now with sausage files, you can embed media cues. And then also you can choose if you want to remove the appended number or not. With remove appended number on, if I change this to a sausage file, you can see that it's removed the numbers at the end of these files. With that setting off, it's just going to use the number that's on the first item for the sausage file. Embed media cues. I'll just render this really quick so you can see. If you have that setting selected, then when you render your sausage file, it's going to place media cues at the start of each variation. So that can be pretty handy, especially if you're creating library stuff, to just have those media cues in there. The other setting I've added is an option for second pass render. So this is in the newer versions of Reaper. If you're creating loops, it can be pretty useful to do a second pass render. And then I also let you choose from this UI whether you want to add the new items to the project, and also if you want to render via master. So with this off, it's going to actually render through the track instead of the master track. Everything else is pretty much the same. You can tab to quickly change the tail length, and then if you hit enter, it's going to render. You can also just use your scroll wheel to quickly change the channel setting. And in addition, you can actually select different items you want to render, and the script will automatically update with what the rendered assets will be. In the settings tab, you also have the option to save render settings with items. So this is going to store a few of the settings that you make with the items themselves. So next time you run the script, they'll be loaded automatically. So let's say I'm working on this set of items, and then I have it set to be a sausage file and second pass render, and the tail length is 3 seconds, and I want it to be mono. So if I render it, now if I select these items again and render them, it will automatically load the mono, tail, sausage file, and second pass render settings. If I select this next asset, as you can see, it's going to use the settings I used last time I rendered it instead. So that can be pretty handy, but it's important to note that currently there's no way to render these using different settings if you have them all selected at once. So it's going to use whatever render settings you have set here. So yeah, those are the new features I've added to NVK folder items. I hope they're an improvement, and thanks for watching.